For the same reasons that we espouse the merits of the Lightning Network as a superior payments network, right? This open, interoperable network that's going to ultimately outcompete closed networks. I think the same thing is true in the loyalty context. There's a couple $100 billion of loyalty value sloshing about globally. This is the value of all the points, all the miles, all the, this and that. And so, how do we get a significant portion of that onto the Bitcoin standard? So think of, an airline, tokenizing their points as a fungible Taproot asset riding on Lightning rails. Same thing with that hotel, same thing with the retail. We think of Bitcoin as the life raft, right? And so right now there are a certain number of ladders that I can climb to get onto the life raft, right? So what Taproot Assets represents really to me fundamentally is the just adding more ladders that various people may take.
Ian Major is the co-founder of Joltz Rewards, a Lightning-powered platform offering Bitcoin rewards as a service. In our conversation, we discussed how Joltz works today. We talked about why the loyalty and rewards industry needs Bitcoin and a Lightning network. And we talked about how Taproot Assets could unlock a new set of loyalty, rewards, and experiences for both consumers and brands. If you enjoyed this episode and if you learned something new, the best way you can show your support is by sending in sats over the Lightning Network. You can use any Podcasting 2.0 app. There are dozens of them out there, but my favorite one to use is Fountain. Before we get into today's show, just a quick message from our sponsors. Today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. Today's show is also sponsored by Stackwork. And Stackwork is a Lightning-powered transcription tool that takes the best of AIs and humans to create better, faster, and less expensive transcripts. We'll have more from Voltage and Stackwork later in the show. Ian, welcome to the show. We've got lots to talk about today. We're going to cover Joltz. We're going to cover rewards, loyalty programs. We're going to cover Taproot Assets, all sorts of stuff. But before we get into that, why don't we start with your background? Give listeners a little backstory on your life prior to Bitcoin.
Absolutely. No, Kevin, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. A huge fan of the show. So I'm really excited for the conversation. The pre-Bitcoin era, it sometimes seems so distant and far away, but I had a kind of roundabout way of stumbling into Bitcoin. I think as many of us had. I think back in 2013, I was first exposed to it. I had a classmate in college who came in sweating every day, and I was like, what's wrong? And he was day trading Bitcoin. And so, at the time it was very unfortunate, as that was my first framing of like, oh, it's this kind of online gambling thing, which, if he had said anything else, if he had said, oh, peer-to-peer digital cash, without an intermediary, I think that really would have clicked because, I've always been a little skeptical of authority and, kind of freedom minded. But unfortunately, that was the first exposure. And so I obviously dismissed it as like, okay, you go enjoy that. And then fast forward to, 2017 cycle, I was one of those guys that had a diversified portfolio of crypto assets and this and that, and didn't really know heads from tails in terms of, why Bitcoin is really special and unique, and kind of rode that down, and sort of was left just having this feeling that there's something here and I need to figure out what the heck that something is. And so I suppose 2018, 19 was when I really went down the rabbit hole and came to the realization of why Bitcoin is uniquely special. And, really it's been, it's been history since then. Professionally, I worked for a number of years as a consultant. We had kind of a software as a service analytics platform. So, we would work with large Fortune 500 companies, helping them do analytics about all sorts of different business domains. And interestingly enough, we were acquired by MasterCard, of all companies, who had made and is making a big play into data and analytics to kind of diversify their core payments business. And so for better or worse, that gave me a view and glimpse into the traditional world of payments and, how the kind of 4-party payment model works and what that means for merchants and economic transaction. So that was very enlightening and kind of intersected with me going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But the other really big aspect of that is, particularly after we got acquired by MasterCard, we ended up doing a lot of work around loyalty. And so we were helping all sorts of companies, whether it's an airline or a hotel chain or a retailer, grocer, right? All these different flavors of businesses. And, these are organizations putting tons and tons of investment into sophisticated loyalty platforms, contextualization engines, personalization engines, basically this idea of how do I get the right offer to the right customer at the right time in the right context, all that good stuff. And what was very interesting, and this has been, like McKinsey and company has done a study on this. There's actually a large percentage of loyalty programs that actually don't break even, right? When you kind of sum up the incremental benefits that they should bring in terms of repeat, purchases, retention, all that good stuff, and you compare that to the costs of the rewards, the costs of delivering the program, I think McKinsey quantified it as about 2/3 of loyalty programs don't actually break even. And we saw that time and time again in our analysis. And that was kind of the dirty little secret, right? Like loyalty is this thing that, large enterprises, businesses of all stripes and flavors feel compelled to offer, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And what really struck me was, despite all this investment in all these sophisticated tools and platforms, there remained really foundational consumer pain points. And in fact, I think if you go, it's like 90% or some overwhelming percentage of social media sentiment towards loyalty programs is negative, right? And, the pain points revolve around really basic things. Like, I want more flexibility. I want more that I can do. I want, to be able to exchange this one form of value into another form of value that I personally, demand more, right? We have all these little silos of all these little points, and they don't talk to each other, and they can't do much, and they can be diluted. So you have like these very basic problems. And so I'll pause there. You can kind of see where we're heading with that, but that really planted the seed in many ways for what would ultimately become Joltz in terms of what we think we can do to solve for some of those problems.
That's very interesting. First question is in relation to your point about first discovering kind of crypto and having this diversified portfolio and then going to Bitcoin. Yeah. Was there a key catalyst there? You said it was 2018, 2019. Do you remember anything specifically that kind of convinced you that building on Bitcoin was the right approach?
It's a good point. It's kind of like a weird class to be from. You've got big group of, class of 2017, you've got big group of 2020, big group of 2021, 18, 19 were sort of those lost years in the last bear market. That's kind of weird and I don't think there was any one particular catalyst. I think it was just that kind of slow grind and realization, watching some bunch of Andreas Antonopoulos videos and like content like that, and Jimmy Song, Saifuddin back in the day. Like, it was just a slow grind of realization. I don't know that there was any one particular eureka moment. And, the more I learned and the more I looked at my own personal experience, it became just exceedingly clear that, like, okay, this is it. This is the thing.
Right. And then when did it dawn on you that there would be a connection between Bitcoin and loyalty programs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, back in 2020, everyone's conjuring up new hobbies to, pass some time during the pandemic and things like that. I actually started a Bitcoin, YouTube channel, to which I continue to this day. And I have a blast with that. I put out about a video a week. I'm like a way less cool BTC sessions with, certainly less hair, but, similar content, tutorials and that sort of thing. And that's been a blast. And so I sort of assumed that, okay, I'll kind of continue on my journey, but this will be my nice like Bitcoin outlet. But I had always had an entrepreneurial bug. My co-founder, Steven, and I had always talked about, different ideas. And I think as time went on, and particularly as we saw some of the, fiscal response as part of the pandemic and this and that, it became increasingly clear to me how inevitable Bitcoin would be. this sort of idea whose time has come, the genie that doesn't go back in the bottle, whatever kind of, phrase you want to use. And that was really the moment that I think it dawned on me to, like, they're really just, it was difficult to justify spending my time on anything other than Bitcoin. I think was the slow realization across 2020. And so it therefore became, sensible for me to try and kind of combine, okay, my professional background and some of these insights around loyalty. And Joltz, by the way, had many different kind of iterations. Like we were originally thinking about, like data footprint monetization, similar how you have like the Brave browser that, can reward folks for, their attention or whatever. We were thinking of like a two-sided marketplace with Bitcoin and data. Ultimately concluded that was a very difficult sort of lift, and ultimately, came back to loyalty. So I think it was just the this virtuous cycle that I'm sure you and a lot of folks listening are very abundantly aware of, is like the more you learn, the more you sort of invest your time, your energy, your thoughts into this thing. And as that happens, it's just, goes round and round, this sort of flywheel. So,
yeah. And what about the Lightning Network? Where did your kind of like understanding of Lightning fit into this puzzle? Was this right when you began to look into building Joltz, or was this afterwards?
yeah, that's a good point. I suppose it was around 2021 where we started to see really interesting things from the likes of like Breeze, right? And, you look at a lot of the ways that self-custodial or non-custodial Lightning wallets are making that experience a lot easier today. I think, the genesis for a lot of those ideas, the use of an LSP sort of behind the scenes to like open a channel with you so that you have inbound liquidity right from the get-go. That kind of cold start problem is a big one. So I think it was just, I was aware of the Lightning Network. I was aware of its sort of promise, but it wasn't until I started to see meaningful leaps forward in the day-to-day apps and wallets that folks could use. And again, I'm always going to encourage people to use the Lightning Network non-custodially if they can. Obviously, that's in some ways not going to be practical for all 8 billion people on Earth. And so you have, other kind of great solutions, whether it's Wallet of Satoshi, et cetera. It was just the realization that like, wow, people like this is real. The learning curve, I think, has been sufficiently lowered, or the barrier to entry had been sufficiently lowered. And then as I increasingly thought about my experience on kind of the merchant side and that 4-party payment model that I became so intimately familiar with via MasterCard, it was just sort of staring me in the face that like this isn't, like, Bitcoin's inevitable, the Lightning Network is inevitable. People always say a technology isn't going to really take off unless it's at least a 10x improvement on kind of the existing status quo. And when you look at the merits of the Lightning Network in the context of commerce, right, probably 10x improvement on card fees that these merchants are paying, instant settlement, no cap and chargebacks, all this good stuff. It's like, okay, that's pretty obvious. So yeah, I would say it was like 2021 where I think we really saw technology come, leap forward. I saw, I think Umbrel was having like a huge, sort of breakout year that year, people running their own nodes, and increasingly having the tools for merchants to also accept payments in Bitcoin. And like, for example, you've got like the IBEXs of the world that allow merchants to accept payments in Bitcoin, but they could still at the end of the day put fiat in their bank account, right? If they need to, pay suppliers in fiat or whatever. So, and Strike, all these things, like it became clear that, this is no longer going to be this sort of impossible chicken and egg problem for embedding the Lightning Network and Lightning Network payments into commerce.
Right. That's very cool. So for those who aren't familiar, can you just give a brief kind of overview of Joltz and how it works?
Absolutely. So at Joltz, we like to call what we do Bitcoin Rewards as a service. There are a whole host of terrific Bitcoin reward solutions out there today. Some are premised on, some are like a card linked product like Fold. You have other crypto exchanges that have their own kind of payment cards. some are browser based or browser extension based, right? You've got the lollies of the world, and others, and all of these are great. And I'm a very happy user of all these things. But ultimately, these are models that are really premised on having this captive audience of Bitcoiners, really, to drive that traffic to merchants. And so early on, that makes a ton of sense, right? Because a merchant, they like, hey, if you could drive me traffic, I don't really care who they are. Like it just makes sense for the merchant. What we're really trying to do is take the next step to help bring Bitcoin rewards more mainstream and build the technology that allows you to bring Bitcoin rewards into existing business environments, where you have existing kind of customer bases. So this Bitcoin rewards as a service, or maybe even white labeled Bitcoin reward solutions, is another way to think about it. And so ultimately, we build technology that enables businesses to bring Bitcoin rewards into their business, into their environment. And so we started that journey basically tail end of last year, start of this year, 2023, with our first product that was really focused on e-commerce. So we had what we believe is the world's first kind of e-commerce integration for popular platforms like Shopify, WooCommerce. We're now set up with Uquid. And so what that means is that, any merchant on one of those platforms can use our integration to do Bitcoin rewards right, natively in their store. They don't necessarily have to, drive people to some other app or, have a gift card that they're bringing in from somewhere else. And so, for example, they could say, hey, I want to do 5% back in Bitcoin for all purchases, or maybe you have to spend a certain threshold before you get the reward. Or maybe, hey, if you shop with us, multiple times over some time frame, you get a reward. So there's all these really, flexible ways to configure those offers based on what the merchant is trying to achieve, or what KPI they're trying to improve, that sort of thing. And so that's been going great. But as we talked with more and more entities, we realized that we're not going to be able to build like a ready-made, out-of-the-box sort of integration for all the things that exist. And so let's build a more general purpose API that would do two things. One, it would allow us to serve significantly larger entities, right? This might be an enterprise that like has their own loyalty app, and right, so they want to control that customer experience. And so let's take Starbucks as an example. Starbucks has really long set the standard when it comes to like mass appeal consumer loyalty. Let's say that one day Starbucks wants to add in Bitcoin rewards as an option for their reward program users to, potentially opt into and earn, or maybe convert, their existing Starbucks points into Bitcoin, that sort of thing. Instead of going and developing all that expertise and technology internally, they can just tap into our API, pull what they want into their app, and away they go. So it's about lowering the barrier for these various entities to be able to incorporate this exciting new, asset that is Bitcoin. And we're also seeing, a lot of interest in like, think of like a traditional loyalty platform. Again, same rationale. Are they really going to go out and hire someone to build out some, Bitcoin expertise, when they could instead just use our API to connect in? And then kind of a final category, just to sort of inspire some thoughts, is think of, the different entities going to market to sell Lightning Network payments to merchants. Rewards becomes this really nice add-on, kind of like a value-added service. Rewards and payments goes perfectly together. So those are some of the areas that we're seeing early kind of interest and traction for our API offering. But at the end of the day, the sort of umbrella that unites all of that is just building technology to help us bring Bitcoin rewards into existing environments, wherever that may be.
Very interesting. I like that distinction you made between some of the other rewards offerings where they may be bringing Bitcoiners to merchants, and you, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you're saying let's go to merchants who already have customers and turn those customers into Bitcoiners. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, roughly correct. We can still we can still certainly help bring users to some of these merchants, as we grow our business. But at the end of the day, we're really focused on arming these businesses with a new capability, and helping them incorporate this new exciting dimension into their existing loyalty programs and propositions. So, don't get me wrong. I want as many ways as possible for existing plebs to stack more sats. That's great. Like, we want that. However, I really think we've yet to crack the nut that is getting Bitcoin rewards truly into the mainstream. And so all the people out there who are kind of on the fence, who just don't know that much about Bitcoin, but have heard of it, are intrigued, but are not intrigued enough to go and get a fold card or go and download a browser extension or go and get a, download BISC or, go on Coinbase and get an account. Like, there's a lot of people for whom all those actions of getting into Bitcoin are a little too high. But if they're anyways shopping with an existing merchant who offers this, not forcing it down anyone's throat, but like, hey, starting now, you can opt into earning in Bitcoin. How many folks that are kind of straddled on the wall might we tip over into saying, you know what, like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then you get your first sats, and what happens? You want to learn about it. The more you learn, the more you want to stack. The more you stack, the more you want to learn. And it's this, again, virtuous flywheel.
Right. I think that's very important. I think it's like at a certain point we have to stop kind of like speaking to other Bitcoiners and trying to kind of like build in this fixed pie environment. And we have to start going, we need to reach out to the broader community, the people who are not yet Bitcoiners, and kind of find ways to introduce them to Bitcoin. So I think that's a really, really clever kind of like proposition there.
Exactly.
What has feedback been like from merchants so far? Anyone you've spoken to about integrating this?
Yeah. So admittedly, we're still very much on that journey of crossing this chasm. So really all of our customers thus far, for the most part, are still very near and dear in the Bitcoin, world. But with that being said, we've been talking to a number of businesses that we might call kind of adjacent, to the Bitcoin business. Think about like precious metals dealers or, other kind of like freedom oriented businesses, right? Like that's, the where we've sort of started outside of the Bitcoin world. And I would say it's been encouragingly, we're very early, right? We just, kind of launched the API product, and we've really just started to approach these businesses in a meaningful way outside the Bitcoin sphere. But I would say it's been encouraging thus far. A lot of them, you'd actually, I think, be surprised by how many of them sort of get it. Like these are just savvy business owners that like personally get it. I think the big question for them is often, well, like, I get it, I'm interested, but how do I find the right way to expose this to my customer base in a way in which I'm not sort of like blanketing everyone? Because it's right. Maybe let's call it 20% or so of, at least in the US, population is probably either held, traded, something around Bitcoin. I don't know what those latest statistics are, but that's probably like a good, and so it's kind of like, okay, how do I identify that fifth of people in my business? And the way you do that is through some elegant mechanism by which people can opt into this, and you're not. So that's like, I would say that's really encouraging. It's not like, and keep in mind, it's August 2023 where we're recording this. We are still very much in the bowels of the bear market, despite the BlackRock, hopium. Like, we're still in the bear market, and there's still, I think, a general overhang of perhaps negative sentiment around the whole space. And yet, despite that, the conversations we're having are not, whoa, guys, like, no, like, what are you talking about? It is rather, how do I introduce this to my customer base in the best way? And so I certainly think that's a leap forward from probably a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. And this is one of the big trends we anticipate as part of this next, big kind of bull run is, again, if we're able to build into our technology this elegant kind of opt-in mechanism, which, we've got a lot of different kind of ideas for that now that we're talking to these different merchants. So yeah, it's I think encouraging, but still early days, and so remains to be seen what the killer solution is.
Fair enough. Now, on this show, we talk a lot about why the Lightning Network is kind of a superior payments solution, and in the payments industry specifically, there's like we just understand why Lightning is useful and unique and better than other payment systems. Why is the Lightning Network the right solution for the rewards industry? What makes it superior to some of the other solutions you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things, and this will get us also into one of the other topics I know you wanted to cover. For one, you have this sort of like instant redemption ability, which is very, very unique. And granted, some businesses are going to be a little bit hesitant to that idea. They're, traditionally, a lot of brands are going to want to keep that value in their four walls. That is to say, hey, if I accrue X number of points with a particular merchant, that merchant wants those points to go back to them naturally, right? And so there is this little bit of tension in this idea of a more open loyalty paradigm. But ultimately, and you already see these early steps being taken by the likes of Starbucks, like I think it's only a matter of time. Ultimately, if history proves relevant in the loyalty industry, it is always just what does the consumer want? And that is the way that the world goes. And so I think you're going to slowly but surely see a more open kind of picture for this. But number one would be this idea of like instant redemption, my ability to make a purchase, to get my Bitcoin, and to be able to immediately withdraw that, and even withdraw it if it's a tiny amount. That is very unique. And, you usually have in traditional loyalty either like point minimums that you need to accrue before being able to redeem or spend them. So it gives going back to what I said earlier, right? This like core pain point of just flexibility. It gives consumers right off the bat a lot more flexibility with how they redeem their reward. Number one. Number two, and this gets a little more meta, a little further out, but it's one that we're really, really excited about, particularly as it relates to Taproot Assets. And so think about, for the same reasons that we espouse the merits of the Lightning Network as a superior payments network, right? This open, interoperable network that's going to ultimately outcompete closed networks. I think the same thing is true in the loyalty context. So I'll give you an example. Like think about how today you have some partnerships, particularly in the travel and travel and entertainment industry. Think of like maybe a partnership between an airline and a hotel chain. So maybe you can accrue some airline miles and redeem some of those miles for a discounted hotel stay, as an example. And so what's happening there is those entities have formed a partnership. And then what's happening behind the scenes are these two, both very archaic loyalty systems are sort of attempting to talk to each other and enable you, the consumer, to exchange that one form of value to another. And what happens, because these systems are so, archaic and sort of kludged together, very kind of Frankenstein-esque, value gets leaked out of that. It's an inefficient transaction. You, the consumer, don't realize it. But what's happening is that, there's a cost of doing that conversion. And not everyone's going to like add up and say, oh, did I get dollar for dollar what I had here? The answer is no. And so this is a very inefficient way to translate one form of value to another. And so you could probably see where I'm heading with this. In the same way as you see the Lightning Network being, for example, used for remittances, I want to send value back to a family member in country, X. And so you're seeing Lightning Network rails being used to sort of interoperate value transfer between fiat currencies. In that same way, you could see Lightning Network rails interoperate value transfer between different units of loyalty value. So think of, an airline, tokenizing their points as a fungible Taproot asset riding on Lightning rails. Same thing with that hotel, same thing with the retailer, same thing with, all of this. And so you have all these different loyalty points riding on Lightning rails that are denominated in sats, that can be exchanged and redeemed immediately in sats, and that can also be exchanged between each other. That opens up so much more flexibility for the consumer. It eliminates a lot of these kind of friction points that we see today. And it really sets the stage for this truly open loyalty economy on a Bitcoin standard, if you will. There's a couple $100 billion of loyalty value sloshing about globally. This is the value of all the points, all the miles, all the, this and that. And so, how do we get a significant portion of that onto the Bitcoin standard? I think this is, one of the ways. You might ask, well, okay, that's pretty clear on the consumer side. What's in it for the merchant? And I think there's a massive like discoverability element. Again, this is going to be scary for merchants. They're going to say, I am used to keeping my four-walled garden, pristine and locked out from anyone else. But again, times are changing. Consumer preferences are changing. We see this in even some of the good research that companies like Bakkt have done about, younger generations, their preferences around loyalty and different, alternative types of loyalty rewards. So I think it's only a matter of time. And ultimately, once brands opt into this, they're going to benefit from this huge discoverability aspect. Like, being able to access a much more global audience with the form of loyalty that we have to offer. And so, not every brand's going to like that, but those that can, that are competitive, I think will benefit immensely. So that's maybe the further out kind of vision for where I think this whole arc of loyalty and Bitcoin goes, over the more kind of medium to longer term.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Just a quick message from our sponsor, Voltage. Voltage empowers engineers to integrate Bitcoin and Lightning Network payments into their business stack with an enterprise-grade experience. The team at Voltage is building the complete tool set so that you can do more than simply spin up nodes, but also understand and interpret your node's data. Their new product, Surge, gives engineers the capability to quickly solve problems and optimize operations. With node insights and visibility through time series data, you get dynamic and complex insights never available before. You can get complete control with insanely fast onboarding, advanced client-side encryption, and zero management infrastructure, making backups, networking, and upgrades simple. Get a free 7-day trial today at voltage.cloud. Now, do you think that by having brands build out Bitcoin loyalty programs and having their consumers earn Bitcoin, that also then leads to more brands accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment? Do you think that flywheel starts really spinning?
That's certainly my hope. That's certainly one of our core hypotheses. I mean, we talk with brands from a lot of different places, and some of the geographies that Latin America, right? Some of these brands are already pretty far ahead thinking about Lightning Network payments, whereas I think that's a slower conversation in many ways for the places like the US, Canada, Australia, Western Europe, these places where Bitcoin is still much more seen as a store of value rather than a proper medium of exchange. And so there are many cases where we talk with business owners and it's like, hey, if I laid out these two options for you to kind of get started with Bitcoin for your business, option one is integrated as a payment option. Option two is add it as part of a loyalty program. That second option in many cases is perceived as being easier. It's perceived as a lower, it's like, well, what does it mean? What does it entail to accept Bitcoin, as payment? What do I as a business need to do in order to prepare for even doing that? What percentage of my, base is even going to, so there's all these kind of questions. And again, don't get me wrong. Like, I want to see, circular Bitcoin economies, merchants accepting Bitcoin. But I think you're exactly right that this can be another vector to get the brand to that, up the learning curve a bit, because now they can see, whoa, okay, we introduced this as an option in our kind of loyalty rewards program, and we can see how our customers are responding positively to it. That gives us the conviction and the data, frankly, to then justify the business decision to accept Bitcoin as payments. And it can certainly go the other way as well. You could start with payments and then go to rewards as this kind of value add. But yeah, we're really keen to see if that holds true, at least given some of the early conversations we're having.
Right. And you mentioned flexibility being a pain point for consumers and
Yeah.
them wanting more. I want more than just the ability to spend my money at Starbucks or
Right.
just the ability to spend it in air miles or whatever, or at a hotel. Um, why has that flexibility problem not been solved with dollars, like leading up to now? I know that the instant settlement at the very small amounts, maybe a limiting factor, but it seems like if it's a real pain point for consumers, why haven't we seen, the siloed individual kind of reward systems break apart and choose to use dollars, over the last few decades?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I do think a big part of the gravity is the organizational kind of inertia of being against opening, our walls out. So I do think you could make a valid argument that like this progression from more closed silos to a more open paradigm, I think you could probably make the argument that to some degree at least, is anyways occurring, even independent of Bitcoin. With that being said, I think what Bitcoin, the role that Bitcoin plays in unlocking that transition is it's just a stronger signal. Like it's just a stronger um, component to motivate behavior change. So what do I mean by that? We've done some research of our own with Joltz, just surveying those in the community, right? Like how likely would you be to switch allegiance from brand A to brand B, if it meant you could earn Bitcoin rewards, right? And Bitcoin adopters, not surprisingly, 90+% of them would either switch or, be very likely to. And so that's just not the same sort of incentive and motivation that you see. Yes, flexibility is a pain point, but it's kind of like, well, am I really going to switch allegiance from one business to another in order to unlock that additional flexibility? Maybe, maybe not. But now that you integrate Bitcoin as this, just we know what happens. Like once you get an understanding of what this thing is, you're like, I need to accumulate as much as possible. I need to use it. I want to use it in all these different aspects. And so it's a much sort of sharper motivator for changing behavior. And so again, I think to some degree you've seen this transition anyways starting to take place, but I think Bitcoin and all the kind of game theory around it is going to really push that transition and accelerate it more than it otherwise would with just a dollar-based sort of system.
Right. Now, you mentioned the size of the rewards industry. You mentioned at any given point, there could be hundreds of billions of dollars kind of sloshing around these different systems.
Yep.
What is the business model for Jolt? How do you kind of like tap into that, multi-$100 billion market?
Yeah, great question. So we try and price our services in a value-based way. So, how much value is the merchant getting from our services? That should be commensurate and proportional to how much, we're earning as revenue. So for our first product that I mentioned, we launched, the e-commerce integrations. That's a super simple model. There's no upfront cost. And we basically just add 5% of the reward value on as a service fee. So let's say I'm a merchant and I give, $100 in rewards in a given month. We would add a $5 in that case service fee. And so this is nice, right? If a merchant has a slow month, that means we have a slow month. If the merchant has, gangbusters month, we have a gangbusters month. And so our revenue kind of scales with the amount of reward value. And then for our API, it's very similar, although we have different bands of subscription tiers based on the amount of reward value. So, hey, up to $2,500 in rewards a month, that'll be, X dollars per month. So that one's a little bit more subscription based on the API side, because we're, in that case, dealing with larger entities, but it's ultimately still expressed as a percentage of the reward value. So, when you think about the business opportunity that presents, 200 billion in all this value sloshing around, what percent of that over time will convert and be, convert onto a Bitcoin standard, as we may say, and then who are the companies that are going to be, enabling that process? I think it's a really sizable market.
Yeah. Now, earlier you mentioned that there were a number of companies, I think you said a majority of companies that are actually running these reward systems and losing money. How are they managing to do that?
And again, this is, one of those dirty little secrets of the industry. Again, we saw this in our empirical, analysis work. McKinsey's, done a study on this, and again, estimated about 2/3. But it's one of these things where, the value and richness of the rewards is offsetting any sort of incremental gains that you're getting. And so the problem, and a lot of times brands are looking, they're looking at performance on a comps basis, right? They're saying, hey, what did we do this year versus last year? And if that number's up, then it's all good. When really the question they should be asking is, what would it have been otherwise had we not done whatever it is that we did? Right? Like, what is the incremental performance change between what would have happened and what did happen based on what we did? And so a lot of times these brands are just looking at comps and saying like, oh, we're up 2%, so all is good. But guess what? If you had actually executed, this loyalty program in a better way, you would have been up 4%, not 2%. And so there's actually a negative 2% incremental impact as a result of that on, profitability or whatever metric you're looking at. So I think it's like the measurement paradigm that a lot of these brands sort of use that leads one to believe that sort of all is well and all is rosy. Or maybe they're looking at, really basic statistics around, hey, as long as like people are redeeming the rewards, that's all that matters. If there's activity happening, but they're not connecting that to the other side of things, which is, are customers actually incrementally purchasing more or incrementally extending their lifetime relationship with us? If one of those things is not true, then you're probably not going to be profitable. So I think it's just, the lens through which they look at some of these numbers can be very misleading.
I see. So if I am a merchant, let's say I'm, selling a coffee mug or something, and it's $100. It's an
Yep.
expensive coffee mug, but
Yes.
I offer a,
Yeah.
$10 back, in Kevin points or something.
Yes.
You're saying that the merchant needs to be turning that $10 then has to come back in the form of, a multiple of that has to come back in the form of a sale, right? For
Correct.
that to make sense.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And another way to say it is like, would you have purchased that coffee mug anyway, even if you didn't have the reward offer?
Right.
And so to the degree that you anyways would have gotten the transaction, then arguably the reward is by definition a loss, maker.
Right.
So the key is to, and this is why these brands invest a lot in these kind of personalization engines, because rarely is it the case that one size offer fits all. Like, you may have a much higher propensity to buy coffee mugs than I do. And so for you were anyways going to buy that coffee mug. And so in some ways, I probably don't want to incentivize you because you were anyways going to do it. Whereas for me, like, that extra carrot is actually really meaningful. Like, that is the difference between me not making a purchase of that coffee mug and making a purchase of the coffee mug. So, this is why you see a lot of brands investing a lot in platforms and analytics that can help them do that targeting, which, so again, my earlier comment was certainly not to suggest that that is a lost cause. Like, that is important, getting smarter with the intelligence by which you target your different, offers. Like, that is important. But it's my hypothesis that there are even like there's two ways that you can fundamentally improve the economics of a loyalty program. One, you either do more intelligent targeting. So I don't give the offer to you, but I give the offer to me, right? That's one way. Or you can kind of raise the baseline, or, raise the tide of all of my customerships, if you will, by enriching the program with just fundamentally more optionality, flexibility, etc.
Mm.
And so this is going to lead, like, yes, you are already a coffee purchaser, but like now that I have sufficiently increased the value prop of this rewards program, now even you are going to increase your behavior in some way, or maybe refer a friend, right? It doesn't have to be, making a purchase. It can be referrals. There's many other kind of valuable actions that you could take. So that's the idea. And I think the inclusion of Bitcoin rewards in a loyalty program is really geared towards that latter, or that second category of improving a program, which is to say, can we just lift the whole sort of tide up, with this new compelling option?
Right. So do you think you guys will ever be in the business of trying to do that personalization and figure out who is the right person to give that reward to? Or is that kind of outside the scope of Joltz?
I could certainly see. I mean, that's my whole background, and a lot of analytic stuff. I think we will likely have some sort of kind of analytics offering to our service at some point in the future. That's not a big focus on the near term, but I do think that matters, and this also ties nicely back to something that we often hear from brands, which is like, hey, okay, remember those savvy business owners I was talking about earlier who personally get it, but are wondering how we get this sort of Bitcoin offer to the right individuals. That could come in very handy if you're able to kind of, identify the profile of your customer who will meaningfully change behavior if they have the ability to earn in Bitcoin. Then that becomes a no-brainer, because now you can introduce it in the right way for the brand that lets them dip their toes in, that lets them see the impact, and then it becomes, a full sort of rollout. So I think at some point eventually, but that's not necessarily our focus first and foremost.
Now, we've talked about loyalty rewards. What about affiliate rewards? And like, I want to understand more about how big that industry is. Is that going to be a focus point for you guys? Because I imagine there's a lot of the same components there, right? It's just you're rewarding someone for helping make a sale,
Yeah.
rather than the person who actually bought something. You're rewarding them at the end.
Absolutely. I'm sort of less versed in some of those specific numbers and market sizes, but you're right. I mean, it's a huge market. There's, a ton of different software as a service, plugins and platforms that help with, referral marketing. And it's something that I think pretty much every business should at least evaluate, and test, because in many cases you're going to get a lower cost of acquisition from referrals than you are from really, any of your other channels. And so the beautiful thing about our API is that there is like a literal section for referrals, that would allow, think of how many, Bitcoin apps and businesses and companies that are going to be going forward. Each of them can do Bitcoin referrals, just using our API. So that is definitely very front and center. We learned very early on that yes, purchases ultimately win the day, but referrals are also massively valuable. And so the creation of our API was done with that in mind. Can we enable these, very kind of creative use cases? You've got referrals, you've got making a purchase. Some of the folks we're talking to have a fairly onerous onboarding process, right? And they have a lot of users kind of drop out of that process, and they don't get all the way through the funnel. So can you maybe sprinkle some sats to incentivize people to get over that hump where they usually fall out? Or, we've talked to some who have maybe a more complex product. And so there's like education that goes along with that. And so they want to maybe incentivize you to complete the educational content, because they know that if you do and you have that better understanding, then you're going to be a more valuable customer over the long run. So, you're right. Like referrals is definitely the kind of probably next like biggest category, but there's all sorts of really interesting use cases that we can think about for Sats Rewards.
Yeah. What are the closest comparables for Jolt in the kind of fiat reward system? Like, are there any good comparisons where people can, help wrap their heads around what this API offering is?
Yeah. So the API offering is an interesting one. I would say on the e-commerce side, the sort of like out of the box integrations, probably the best analogy there would be Smile. I think their website's smile.io. They do really well. They do. You've got like the little kind of icon at the bottom of a bunch of Shopify and WooCommerce stores that you can click and say, opt into this program and you can earn rewards and points and this and that. So Smile actually does a really nice job, and they've got like I think over 100,000 merchants. Now, granted, this is the longer tail. These are kind of smaller, more SMB, small, medium-sized businesses. But Smile would be a really good analogy for the kind of integration side of things. For the API, some of the very, very big, like, Adobe has a very sophisticated loyalty program. Salesforce does some stuff around loyalty in addition to their core kind of CRM efforts. So some of these like really, really big entities do have some API kind of functionality, but usually it's the case that you're going to like a loyalty provider. So they are providing you like the whole platform. And so for us, it's a little bit unique. We're not necessarily saying, hey, brand, go and abandon your existing loyalty in totality. Not at all. We're saying add this in to enrich what you already have. So yeah, I would say there's probably fewer analogies on the API side of things, but some of those bigger players definitely have, pretty rich kind of API capabilities
right.
As a comparison.
That makes sense. Okay, I want to get into Taproot Assets.
Yes.
Now, you are working on a Taproot Assets wallet.
Correct.
Why?
We just didn't have enough else on our plate. So no, it's a great question. So this really spawned. Since we founded Joltz, we've had this hypothesis that like, yes, Bitcoin rewards, Sats makes sense, great, perfect. But when we say Bitcoin rewards, we want to have a relatively wide definition of what that means, and so we were struck by I go back to Starbucks, every time. They launched what they called their Odyssey initiative last year. And this is, I think it's now in open beta, if I'm not mistaken. But this is basically their like Web3 extension to their loyalty program. And of course they're building this on Polygon because it's so green and good for the environment. But, with that being said, like when I have learned in my career, when Starbucks does something, it's usually good to kind of pay attention and look at what they're doing. And so what this is basically the ability for their loyalty program members to opt into this kind of additional layer of their loyalty and earn things like digital badges that can be shown off as sort of more cosmetic things, but also like token gated collectibles or collectibles that unlock token gated content or exclusive experiences or trips to a local Starbucks coffee farm or all these different things. And they're very careful to abstract away a lot of the language, and they don't call them NFTs. They don't call they call them digital journey stamps, I think, or something to that effect. And I know this is a very kind of controversial topic within the Bitcoin community, but at the end of the day, like we think there should be a Bitcoin related solution for that type of loyalty use case, right? The awarding of badges and digital collectibles that can be tradable, exchangeable, and that can unlock token gated content. This can also be a nice replacement for the traditional kind of password and login that all these merchants have on me. And so we looked at what was happening at Starbucks. Liquid Death, the water brand, also has done a lot of stuff on this. And there's other examples of that, but we were very compelled by that. And so, we looked at different, some of the different protocols that are pursuing the ability to create these types of collectibles on Bitcoin. We ultimately landed with Taproot Assets for a number of reasons, but that would be like one sort of use case for Taproot Assets are these loyalty collectibles that again can maybe like we've got one customer, for example, whose product is kind of these like a limited time series. And so what that means is that customers are like really on edge trying to make sure they get access to this product that that's very scarce. And so one potential idea there, for example, could be the rewarding of his most loyal customers with one of these loyalty collectibles that then bestows them access to this special token gated page on his website where they can get early access to these new product launches, for example. So that would be like one example on the loyalty collectible side. And then the other thing, of course, that Taproot Assets would unlock is going back to some of the more kind of fungible loyalty tokens, if you will. So putting points themselves, on Lightning Network rails, and for all the reasons we discussed previously on why that would be valuable both for consumers and businesses. So those are like the two categories that we're thinking about, at least in the context of loyalty for Taproot Assets. And so long-winded kind of roundabout there to your actual question of the wallet. It's just that there is nothing that exists. Taproot Assets, obviously formerly known as Taro, had the whole kind of legal scuffle with, I think, Tari from the Monero community, if I'm not mistaken. And so there was this kind of lull and pause, and they had to rebrand it. And so there was this kind of like, a little bit of a pause, but it's really, really exciting now, the different releases that are being put out. The protocol itself is pretty close to being kind of, stable and backwards compatible, all that good stuff. So, we thought this was a good opportunity and way, given that we already have some of these use cases, lined up. Like, let's go ahead and, build a wallet that's going to enable people to, to engage with this. And the wallet, I'm pleased to say, also has some other really cool bells and whistles to this. It's fully self-custodial, fully non-custodial. It uses what are called kind of ephemeral apps to really make it easy for someone who has no idea of anything. Like, let's imagine just, average Joe shopping on, some merchant's website and gets either sats as a reward or maybe this loyalty collectible, whatever. This wallet would basically serve as a default. We're agnostic, by the way, like, your Lightning payouts that you can get in your rewards, you could use whatever wallet that you want, but this will at least be a default option for people to be able to take self-custody of their rewards right off the bat without having to, be knowledgeable of all this stuff. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming with this wallet, and probably later this month, if not early next month, we'll start, releasing it out in short form.
Very cool. So I want to make sure I have this correct. Is it true that you guys see 3 kind of separate buckets of rewards, one being money and Bitcoin, one being points, and this might be enabled by Taproot Assets, and then the other being collectibles, which also enabled by Taproot Assets? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Talk to me about like the framework a merchant might use to determine when they should be offering one type of rewards over another.
Yeah, great question. And we certainly don't want to, we can't be all things to all people. It's not sensible to build, an infinite number of kind of variations, and nor do we necessarily think that a given merchant will or that all merchants would be using, kind of all 3 buckets. But, to give a flavor, like, sats are really, really good at driving kind of engagement, activity in an app, purchases, maybe referrals as well, right? Like, that gets you a lot of the value around, we kind of laid out on our website, attract, engage, retain. And so sats are really, really good at really all 3, but particularly good at the engage and kind of attract stages. So whether that's referrals, sats for making a purchase, etc. When it then comes to like retention and really almost gamifying loyalty in a way, that's where I think the collectibles piece can really come in. This is something that in many cases would be really for your like most loyal, upper kind of echelon of customers, something to really differentiate them and recognize them, for their loyalty. A lot of this comes down to recognition, right? And it's very, people are like, I don't know, these, collectibles, stupid. It's like, it's fine. Some people are going to think that, but there's others who find just a great deal of value in simply being recognized as a customer of a particular brand. And I think the brands that have that really passionate base, like, I don't know that Macy's will go and kind of pull off a compelling loyalty collectible, But, if you think of brands that really have a more kind of rabid fan base, this is where you will see loyalty collectibles, I think, really play and excel. And then I would say the sort of fungible, loyalty points, probably a little bit further out, and that can help a merchant with, like, I would almost even imagine like reward federations. This idea of, and you see this today, right? Like you see the airline partnering with the hotel, to have some sort of joint program or joint offering where consumers can kind of exchange value from one side to the other. I think that speaks to like partnerships that a brand could do, or forming these partnerships. Like that is certainly going to be the first step in that bucket or category before the truly open, fully open, loyalty interoperable kind of network. I think you'll see merchants being able to form partnerships and coalitions and federations with perhaps non-competing, but maybe still complementary, sort of friends, and so that gives them more of an internal operational lever at their disposal, versus the other two that are a little more consumer centric.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Just a quick message from our sponsor, Stackwork. Stackwork is a Lightning-powered platform for generating high-quality transcripts of all your audio or video content. They combine AI engines and hundreds of human workers all over the world who are paid over the Lightning Network to assemble these transcripts. And that's what lets Stackwork create better, faster, and less expensive transcripts. To see the results for yourself, you can check out my personal website where I host transcripts for all my podcast episodes. If you want to learn more about Stackwork, visit stackwork.com. That is STAK work.com. Now, Bitcoiners there's an entire spectrum of views on Taproot Assets.
Yes.
On the one hand, this is going to be incredible. It's going to bring all sorts of activity to Bitcoin, to Lightning. The other hand, this is terrible, and this is going to, we're like lowering ourselves to the standards of other digital assets and crypto collectible stuff.
Right.
What is your kind of pitch to someone who is skeptical about Taproot Assets, who kind of maybe lies on that the end of the spectrum towards this is not a good idea, but maybe someone who's open-minded as well?
Yeah.
What's your pitch to them about why they should be interested, why they should be kind of like looking at Taproot Assets and kind of like engaging with this idea, and what it could mean for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think, rarely are these things so black and white, right? Like, dare I say that there is often some, nuance involved in some of these discussions. And so, of course, you need to look at the cost and you need to look at the benefits of any of these things. And so I think some of the skepticism that you're rightly outlining, like, yeah, that definitely goes in the cost column. I mean, there's all sorts of hypothetical sort of issues we might imagine about, like, stable coins is another really big, obviously, category that people are thinking about for Taproot Assets. What happens if I have a bunch of these kind of centralized issuers? Like what does that mean? What could that mean? And so, yes, we should acknowledge that, but we should also carefully examine the potential benefit side to that equation. And so for me, I look out there and, like, whether, just look at the market cap for stablecoins. Like, the market speaks. Clearly there's a use case, particularly in emerging markets where maybe they don't have, as good of access to dollars or something like that. Like, the market cap clearly demonstrate that there is a use case here. And so what that means is that there are a lot of people out there whose only way to stumble into Bitcoin might be stablecoins. Similarly, there might be people out there whose only way they're going to stumble into Bitcoin is through this kind of loyalty collectible, right? Oh, what is this? Oh, okay, interesting. This is on Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? Like, so I view that as the core benefit. So you say, okay, this is a way for many more individuals to kind of stumble. You're basically just, we think of Bitcoin as the life raft, right? And so right now there are a certain number of ladders that I can climb to get onto the life raft, right? So what Taproot Assets represents really to me fundamentally is the just adding more ladders that various people may take to get onto the lifeboat. That for me is the bottom line. Now, the other important point though to think about is like, well, there's more efficient and less efficient ways of enabling these additional use cases. It's like, great, like lay up more ladders to the life raft, but if it takes so much time and energy and effort to craft this ivory ladder that you're stacking onto the life raft, or God forbid, if this additional ladder that you stack onto the life raft somehow gets stuck into the life raft and blows a hole in it, right? Like obviously we don't want that either. And so I think it's interesting to compare, for example, like ordinals and inscriptions, BRC20 tokens, all that kind of wraps into one category. Like in many ways, and again, people have very, very diverse opinions on this. I've looked at it more as like an interesting experiment. And I think even some of the documentation page of BRC20 tokens, like literally says, this is an experiment. Like you probably shouldn't put any wealth in this. And it even says like Taproot Assets, I think they used, Taro, is a way more efficient way of doing these types of use cases. So while it was the case that ordinals, inscriptions took off first in the sense that these are people just kind of hacking these things together, they are a much less efficient way to unlock some of these additional use cases from the perspective of like block space. And so that's what I would say. Like, okay, yes, there are potential risks. But there's also really big potential benefits. You're laying these additional ladders. And if you can prove that you're laying the ladders in a way that's not going to disrupt the life raft and is only going to enable more people to come onto it, then for me, that sort of checks the box that like on a net, this is a good thing for Bitcoin. And for me, that's where, something like Taproot Assets lands.
I really like that analogy with the life raft and the ladders.
Kind of making it up as I went. I was like, this goes pretty deep. Yeah.
When do you expect, Taproot Assets have been in development for a while. When do you expect to see real people using Taproot Assets, either as stable coins or as collectibles in kind of a reward system?
Yeah, I honestly think sometime next year for sure. I know Lightning Labs is working, hard to, make the protocol basically fully backwards compatible. So there will be no more like, consensus breaking changes. We'll probably see that in the next, couple months or so. Then the big thing for later this year and or early next year will be, Taproot Asset enabled channels, Lightning channels. And so once you have those pieces in place, you've got all the scaffolding, you've got the protocol set. And so I realize next year is a fairly wide kind of timeline, but yeah, I think that is very reasonable. And we're going to certainly see at least like beta use cases of that, at least for Joltz, probably much sooner than that.
Where do you expect to earn money in this Taproot Assets ecosystem, right? You're going to have the wallet, you potentially have partnerships with merchants who offer collectibles. Where does Joltz make money in that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's really just this just expands our repertoire of rewards that we can offer merchants. So, all the Taproot Asset functionality will be made available through our API. And so, think of it like, hey, I'm subscribing to Joltz's core rewards functionality, and I'm also adding in, Taproot Assets because I want to do that. So that is certainly one way. For the wallet, we're thinking about different things around like minting, to the degree that like lots of different, right? I mean, we're building this obviously with consumers and merchants in mind for this sort of loyalty context, but to the degree that, a lot of other people and users want to use this, then that could also open up, an ancillary revenue stream for us where, right, we charge some non-zero amount for these mints of these assets. And so that could be another way that we do that. But our goal in launching this wallet is not really to kind of like make money from the wallet per se. It's really to enable what we think is a truly world-class experience for someone to get onto the lifeboat who's not currently on it today.
Mm-hmm. One line I saw on your website I want to bring up, I thought it was really interesting. You said 52% of the US population has purchased a digital asset. I'm curious to know what is the what is
I know
being
I'd have to.
considered as a digital asset there? And, looking forward, if you expect, others to be earning and using digital assets, what will they be doing with those digital assets? Will it be the same use cases that we see today, or will it be new use cases?
Yeah, really good question. I have to dig up in our notes where we found that. But that's like all crypto, any crypto of any kind.
Got it.
And I think that was taken from the 2021, near the cycle high. And so this was literally anyone who's like, bought, think of all the people that have maybe bought like, some Dogecoin on Robinhood, right? Like that would include those folks as well.
I see.
Um, the sort of I think a probably more robust number is more of that like 20% that I mentioned earlier. These are folks that have like held, held Bitcoin and sort of like understand it enough to want it as a kind of reward or maybe as an option amongst several rewards. But yeah, I mean, look, I there are many altcoins that are gonna obviously go to zero. Are all of them gonna go to zero? I don't know. Like maybe over a long enough time horizon, but I, unfortunately think that we're probably gonna see a lot of shenanigans and degeneracy and this and that in the next bull cycle and probably the bull cycle after that. And so, like, part of our goal and mission here is for these use cases that people are inevitably going to pursue, can we build that on a fully Bitcoin based technology stack, right? And that really was okay. Seeing what Starbucks is doing, okay, interesting. They chose Polygon for all these kind of messaging reasons, right? It's so green. It's this and that, right? Like we want to have a Bitcoin competitor in the ring for that because we just believe that more businesses are going to adopt this type of stuff. And whether folks believe it or not, it's like, wouldn't you at least rather have some of that activity come back and benefit Bitcoin? Like that's kind of the way that we think about it.
Okay, so I want to hear your kind of like dream list of merchants. If you think about all the tools that you're building, all the functionality that you have, which merchants, if you had your ability to kind of pick and choose, would you be like injecting these ideas into? So Bitcoin rewards, the points based on Taproot assets, or collectibles. Any particular
Yeah.
merchants that stand out to you as like they need to be using this?
That's tough. I mean, you could go purely based on sort of size, and for that you would include like the Starbucks of the world, and then some of the major maybe airlines. Like, I mean, I used to fly a lot more than I do now. Back in my consultant days. I mean, airlines are just so horrific. Like, wouldn't it be nice to have just something that could make you, at least I'm earning a little bit of Bitcoin by going through this absolutely disastrous process of trying to fly anywhere these days. Like, so maybe airlines could benefit because they are also the ones that and hotels for that matter. Like they have by far the most archaic back end loyalty systems. And so when you think about like upgrading your kind of loyalty program to a Bitcoin standard, like that's probably where both from a size dimension as well as the just sheer archaicness of their existing systems, those are probably the types of entities who would gain the most from engaging with this type of stuff. So that would probably be, that would certainly be on my list. Starbucks for all the reasons we discussed.
Would it ever
But there's
make sense for
also,
someone like Apple? Like I'm thinking about like they're probably the biggest company in the world. I
yep.
don't know that do they even have a loyalty program? Not that I'm familiar with.
I'm not either, and that's a really good point. I mean, they probably assume that they don't need one, and they've, I think, maybe have been right on that for some time. But it's kind of like, well, with growth slowing, who knows? Like that could be a really interesting vector for them. But yeah, like the beautiful thing about this is that we've built our technology, and obviously Bitcoin itself and sats zipping across the Lightning Network are built in a way that like you could plug these into just about anywhere and anything. Internet native money, like the ability to sprinkle a handful of sats in all these different diverse contexts. Like I don't think you could say a company to where I'd be like, well, I don't know what we would potentially do with them. Like there is definitely an opportunity for every single company on planet Earth. And as we were saying earlier, like that can be a really compelling dip their toes in to then ultimately lead to a more substantial, maybe adopting Bitcoin as a treasury strategy or adopting, accepting Bitcoin payments. I really think rewards can be the kind of first domino that we flick down for a lot of these big merchants.
Very cool. All right, let's jump into the lightning round. I got a few rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. If you could only hold one asset for the next decade and it could not be Bitcoin, what asset would it be?
Oh, brutal. That's a brutal question. Honestly, I'd have to give a shout out to physical gold.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily call myself a gold bug, but yeah, physical gold.
Fair enough. Has there been any book that has changed your view of the world?
I think it's probably behind me. Atlas Shrugged. I would say a lot of people love Ayn Rand, but yeah, I think crystallized a lot of things that I loosely held in my head without really being able to articulate why I believe those things.
Yeah.
Would highly encourage any Bitcoiner, if you haven't already, to read Atlas Shrugged and read the work of Ayn Rand for sure.
If you could change one thing about either Bitcoin or the Lightning Network, what would you change?
Wow. Oh man, that's tough. I think, there's a number of innovations I'm really excited about in the context of the Lightning Network, like things like channel factories that I think will really go a long way to being able to bring just a lot more users onto it. Like I think there is still a scalability question around Lightning, and so I would love to see more, just the advancement of some of the different proposals that and implementations that are being worked on to advance that. Maybe some privacy stuff, but again, that's tricky. That's tricky at the protocol level for a lot of different reasons. But there you go.
Yeah, very cool. And then finally, who is one builder in the Bitcoin or Lightning ecosystem that you'd like to give a shout out to for doing great work?
Well, I said Breeze earlier, and so I got to give a shout out to Roy Scheinfeld, man. This guy, read some of his Medium articles where he talks about this kind of Lightning flywheel, and they now have their LSP as a service. I think you've had Roy on,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. Again, in so many ways, I think paved the way for this new paradigm of self-custodial usage of Lightning. That's like actually a lot easier than it used to be, and there are very, very few I can think of who have as just wide of a lens on the Lightning Network as Roy.
Awesome. Yeah, great choice, and 100% agree. Let's finish this off. Where can listeners go to learn more about you and Joltz?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Ian__major. I can probably give you my Nostr pub key as well. We can maybe put that in the show notes. And then for Joltz, you can follow us on Twitter at Joltz Rewards. That's JOLTZ Rewards. And then you can find us at joltzrewards.com, where you can see some of our different capabilities. But yeah, those are probably the main channels.
Awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat today. I learned a ton, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Absolute pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for having me on.
In the last 30 days, you guys sent in 45,640 sats, and I came in from 46 different supporters. Great to see the number of sats and supporters climbing up. Thank you again to everyone who's been contributing to the show. It means a lot. Let's run through some of the last week or so comments. We have from episode 115 with Tony Giorgio. I opt out says, tinkering with Mutiny, had a small amount in the wallet and the channel was closed for no reason. Optimistic for future updates like coin joins with a heart orange emoji. Thank you, I opt out. And hope that channel situation gets remedied in Mutiny. Blockchain Boog sent in 5,000 sats and said, great pod. Again, episode 115 with Tony Giorgio. Said, I like the idea of having Lightning funds sit in Mutiny versus on Cash App. I joined Mutiny I joined Mutiny Plus today to help support the team. I really like the wallet so far. Had some liquidity issues, but that's just how Lightning is. Overall, great pod, and I can't wait to see what the Mutiny team builds in the future. Vake sent in 2,000 sats and said he is also excited to try out Mutiny Wallet. Bond sent in 1337 sats and said, pretty sure RoboSats and the P2P Lightning Exchange uses HODL contracts. And that is on episode 113 with Super Testnet. I think that is a different tool that RoboSats is using. I don't think it is Super's HODL contracts, but correct me if I'm wrong. The Swiss Road to Crypto sent 1,000 sats and said, always interested in this type of content on Stacking Sats 7 with Brianna Honkawa Destries on Stacking Sats on Nostr. BTC Rich sent 500 sats, said, great pod as usual. We had a few people create clips of the episodes, of the recent episodes. We had Michael Machulev send in 500 sats and said, very excited to see how Mutiny continues to grow. We had Gray Ruby sent in 1,000 sats and said, my man Siggy, thanks KR on episode 8 of Stacking Sats with Siggy47 on Stacker News. Blockchain Boog says, thanks for this, a pleb interview. Sent in 5,000 sats, again on Stacking Sats number 8. Kepford said, great episode. Siggy47, you did a great job explaining the Stacker News value. And an anonymous user said, great stuff on episode 115 with Tony Giorgio. Thank you again to everyone who's been sending in comments, sats. It means a lot. I can't wait to see what you guys send in this week.